we're good to go.
All right. In that case, then, we are going to get started in 3, 2, 1.
I am Arthur Frayne, and I am Zardoz. I have lived 300 years, and I long to die, but death is no longer possible. I am immortal. I present now my story, full of mystery and intrigue, rich in irony, and most satirical. It is set deep in a possible future, so none of these events have yet occurred. But they may. Okay, record now.
Hello and welcome. Welcome and hello. This is Wait, You Haven't Seen? It's a show where we talk about movies. Specifically, we talk about a movie at least one of us has never seen before. I'm your host, Travis, a.k.a. TV's Travis, and this is episode number 200. And because of that, the movie had to be something extra special. So this week, Drew Burrus from The More You Nerd is coming on, and we are going to talk about 1974's Zardoz. Neither one of us had ever seen this before. Drew, how are you?
I am apathetic? No. I'm better than apathetic. I am doing great, man. How are you doing?
I am doing quite well. So this is a hell of a movie. The opening that you just heard was a 2-minute long opening that is just a head floating on a black background as he basically tells you what the movie is going to be.
With a Sharpied on mustache and beard. And
yes,
I was watching this movie thinking, oh man, that'd be so fun to do the mustache and beard Sharpie. And then I realized, no, not going to work.
No.
Not going to work. But if you had any question about how pretentious this movie was going to try to be.
Oh boy. So, all right, what's your history with Zardoz as a movie? Because I hadn't seen it before and you hadn't either, but I'm curious what your history was with just knowing about it at all.
So I became aware of this movie possibly through FilmSack. Did they cover this on FilmSack at some point?
They did, yeah.
I feel like if it was super early. And it was that and the Sean Connery costume and the phrase, which I can't believe I'm going to say this on a public thing because, the penis is evil. Those are literally the only 3 things I knew about this movie.
Okay. So, kind of the same for me. I knew of it before. I had heard about this movie many, many years ago and just how bonkers it was. And it was a big flop and all this kind of stuff. But my knowledge of it was, okay, so we've got Sean Connery in a leather mankini and bandoliers with long hair. And then from the FilmSack episode where they did that, the quote, "The penis is evil." That's basically, same thing. That was my knowledge of it. It's came out in 1974, written and directed by John Boorman. And if that name doesn't sound familiar, he had previously to this done Deliverance. And it was a huge hit.
Super successful Deliverance.
Yeah. So on the heels of that, he wanted to make the Lord of the Rings trilogy live action. So he started working on that. But nobody wanted to put the money up for it because it was just going to be too expensive. So he's like, okay, fine. And he started writing this. And he shopped it around. And nobody wanted to make it. Nobody got it. None of the studios got it.
I'm not sure he got it.
Well... So even Warner Brothers, who he had made Deliverance for, he's like, I made them a bunch of money. And they still didn't want to do it. His agent, I believe, knew an executive at 20th Century Fox and basically told that guy, hey, I've got a script I want you to read. we're gonna have you read it, but I need to know yes or no within 2 hours. And the guy's like, I don't understand what it is, but sure, let's do it. So John Boorman got to make his movie. Now, a few years later, he tried again to make Lord of the Rings, and still nobody wanted to do it. So then he pivoted and made Excalibur.
Which is that the Sean Connery Knights of the Round Table movie?
It is it's an Arthur Knights of the Round Table, but Sean Connery's not in it. That one has Nigel Bruce as Arthur, and Helen Mirren's in it. It's a great Arthurian film in my opinion, but it's a little out there. It's you can tell when now that you've seen this movie, if you watch Excalibur, you'll be like, oh yeah, no, it's the same guy making it. Like there's some parallels there. But yeah, so he makes this movie. Now here's the thing that I found, and this was kind of one of those where I read it and I was like, no, really? Director Sir John Boorman would later admit that he was under heavy drug influence while writing the film and during production. He also claims that not even he is sure what parts of the film are about, mainly due to the haze of drugs he was on at the time, and feels several scenes.
I refuse to believe that.
Exactly. I was like, no. Really? If anything, I feel as though not watching this movie while high on drugs probably does it a disservice. Like,
potentially, I feel like I would have maybe enjoyed it slightly differently in a different mental construct.
Yeah, I mean, look, I have never taken psycho-altering drugs. No recreational psycho-altering drugs or anything like that. I have to feel as though watching them might make some of this movie make a little tiny bit of sense.
There is apparently a novelization of this movie written by John Boorman and the person who co-wrote the script with him that fills in some of the gaps in this movie. And I only say that to say that, man, maybe I should read that before saying I'm never going to read that.
But here, so here was the thing. When I'm watching this movie, that was actually my thought was, I don't think, okay, so the movie did horribly at the box office because, number one, executives didn't know what to do with it, so they weren't really sure how to market it. The marketing makes no sense whatsoever because the movie makes no sense. And audiences, people were coming out of the theater basically telling people in line, don't go see that movie. So it had something like $1 million or $1.5 million budget. And I think it made half of that in theaters. Like it just bombed hardcore.
Yeah, that tracks.
And I get it. I fully understand why, like, this is a movie that A, not a lot of people are going to enjoy when they see it, and then B, could garner a huge cult following. Like it's both of those things.
It definitely has cult following vibes before. Well, the costumes alone are cult following vibes. The concept behind it when you open it with a giant floating stone head
yes.
screaming into the universe, that you're going to get a cult following out of that. But I also wonder if that is people that were, because this came out in 1974.
Mm-hmm.
Did the cult following erupt because it was a good movie, because it was a good movie to watch high, or because some people out there really, really resonated with it?
I'm going to go with the third option there. And I think it's because it's just weird enough that there's going to be some people that'll latch onto that because they just like weird esoteric art. Like, as I was watching this, one of the things I thought was this felt like a live action Richard Williams piece.
I don't think I'm familiar with that.
Did you? Well, okay. So Richard Williams did the animation for Roger Rabbit, and he also did The Thief and the Cobbler, which was in development hell forever. But he did the Raggedy Ann and Andy movie from the 1970s is another one that he did. Very like. If you think Ralph Bakshi has some weird animation going on, Richard Williams can take that to a different level. And so, like, parts of this felt like that, like it was just this LSD trip of things going on. And then I was thinking about it, and it's odd to have a movie. Now, this movie's an hour and 45 minutes long, which when I saw that running time, I'm like, oh, that ain't bad at all. But it feels so much longer than that.
Until you get to what you think is the like climax, and there's still an hour left in the movie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. So it's like it's simultaneously way too long and not long enough to cover everything they tried to pack into it either.
Yes. So I'm going to say a defense of Zardoz right now.
Go.
I think that the idea and the concept, at least that I understand it to be watching this movie, not bad, actually interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I think there are some very, very interesting things about people with immortality, about a world that's controlled by a person with immortality, and things like that. I think are very, very interesting. Stylistically, this is very 1970s, which, you know, what are you going to do with that? Of course, the execution of this is, I don't honestly think Sean Connery knew what was going on throughout any of this movie.
No. So this was coming off of the Diamonds Are Forever James Bond movie. I think that
Which was his last, correct?
That was his last official one, yeah. So that was 1971. And he apparently, according to what I read, was having trouble finding work. And so John Borman originally had cast Burt Reynolds in that role. Burt Reynolds was going to play the role of Zed because they'd worked together on Deliverance.
Yeah, who had just starred in Deliverance.
And, they had a good working relationship. Reynolds was a big star. But then Reynolds had to back out illness of some kind. I think he was just probably like overworked or didn't want to do it, whatever it was. So he didn't do that.
I don't want to do this. Don't want to do this movie.
Brown bottle flu. So
why was the first impression I did on this episode Burt Reynolds and not Sean Connery?
Because this is not like Sean Connery as Sean Connery. Like, we're so used to seeing him playing either James Bond or characters that have... Sean Connery has such a presence on screen, and in this movie, he's just kind of there. Like, the character doesn't have much to do other than stand around and occasionally run from one spot to another.
I'm going to walk stage right.
Yeah. But it doesn't feel like Sean Connery at any point in the movie, really. Not in the way that you would think of. So I can kind of see where Burt Reynolds would be the first one. But it's like,
honestly, is Burt Reynolds not taking this role the reason why Sean Connery has a mustache in this movie?
I think so. Honestly, I would back that up because it makes perfect sense. Although Burt Reynolds didn't have a mustache when he worked with Borman before, so it's a tricky one. It's hard to say. But this movie
it was the mid 70s.
Yeah. But because Connery was supposedly having trouble finding jobs, Borman was able to cast him, and they paid him like $200,000 to do the movie, which not a ton adjusted for inflation, it's quite a bit, and it was like a fifth of the budget or something. But also for an actor the stature of Sean Connery, even at that time, probably was a little low. But I guess he wanted to work with Borman because he lived at the Borman estate. They shot a lot of this in Ireland, and while they were shooting it, he apparently stayed at their estate and would like use his own car to get around and do stuff that normally like stars wouldn't do.
Interesting.
And like supposedly he paid Borman's wife some rent for like keeping him, putting him up and food and stuff. This is according to, I think, Charlie Borman, John Borman's son, talked about that. But I read that in a couple of different places that he stayed there while they were filming.
Did I see that John Borman's wife also did the costumes for this movie?
Yes, I did see that. And boy, those costumes are something else. And now, here's what I will say about the costumes. I liked I'm with you. All right, so I'm going to back up a little bit. I am with you in that I think from 1,000-foot, 10,000-foot level, the idea of this movie, really intriguing. There's some really cool kind of like kernels of story here. It was just a feature film is not the way to tell the entirety of this story in one feature
I agree
film.
With that. Well, this movie reminded me of two things specifically, and that one is 1964, 66. I can't remember when this came out. The Prisoner, the British TV series, The Prisoner. Mm-hmm. Have you seen that one?
A little bit of it, yeah.
So basically, it's the idea that there is this guy who was a spy and he retires from being a spy, and then all of a sudden wakes up and finds himself on this island. He no longer has a name. He is now number 6, and he is menaced by someone named number 2. And if he tries to get away from this island, these roving bubbles will capture him and take him back. And so every episode of that show is about him trying to figure out how to get off the island. And number 2 changes every episode. We never meet number 1. The show, it's really interesting. We covered it for the More You Nerd a couple of years ago, and it's a really fascinating show. But just this idea of someone in a place they don't understand, sort of out of sorts with everybody else that's been there for longer and is sort of more acclimated to that environment. I see Zed, which Sean Connery's character being named Zed, that's very British. I'm just going to call him Z. Is just that idea that sort of, he doesn't know what's going on, but he's going to kind of roll with the punches if he can. Obviously, it's a little different because everyone is in a position of authority in the Zardoz world, while he's the only one that's not. But the other one, weirdly, is The Good Place, NBC's The Good Place, because I don't know whether or not that show was influenced by Zardoz, but it's a very similar context.
That's an interesting one. Yeah.
Did you watch that show at all?
I saw some of it. Yeah, I didn't watch a ton, but.
So I'm gonna spoil later seasons of The Good Place. So it's a show that's been off the air for years. Eventually, when we actually go to The Good Place, everybody is super bored and apathetic because they've been living for millions and millions of years.
Yeah.
At the end of time. And that once you've done everything you could possibly do in an infinite number of human lifetimes, there's really not much more to be interested in. Sure. And again, I don't know that that Zardoz influenced that, but that's a concept that I've only seen twice, and it's weird that one of them was Zardoz.
Well, it's interesting because this movie has like so much that it's trying to do that it doesn't really accomplish any of those things. Like there's a mystery involved at one point, because we start off, we get an opening scene. So that opening with the floating head of Arthur Frayne, as he tries to tell you what's going to happen in the movie, that was done at the behest of the studio. They were like, "Hey, can you put something at the beginning of the movie that's going to help people figure out what the hell is going on?" And it doesn't really at all. Like, it tells you everything that's going to happen, sort of, without telling you anything that's going to happen.
But this is all definitely going to happen, but also maybe not.
Yeah, exactly. And then we open with that giant stone head coming down to this like desolate field where we have just random bunch of guys in their red mankinis, and they're running around yelling, "Praise be to Zardoz." And the giant stone head then has a very booming voice and tells them that guns are good, and the penis is evil, and procreation is evil, and you need to kill the brutals. And then it vomits out a whole bunch of shotguns and rifles and ammunition, and they all go crazy for it, pick it all up, and then we cut to a new scene. So
apparently, by the way, that scene was super complicated to film because this was all filmed in Ireland, and there was a huge problem with importing guns into Ireland because of the IRA in the 1970s.
Yes. Yep, they were having trouble getting the prop weapons in, and I can see that. But then it cuts to we just see from the inside of the giant stone head, and there is a bunch of grain, and then Sean Connery comes out from the grain, confused, and doesn't know what's going on. And those scenes inside of there were weird. And also, I want to know exactly how they pulled that off, because there's a bunch of people inside the giant stone head, like shrink wrapped.
Some of them were more shrink wrapped than others.
Yes, and some of them you could see like just barely moving as they're breathing, like where the shot would be like from their neck down, so you can tell like their face obviously isn't covered. But then other of them, it's like, did they just have to hold their breath for the entirety
Yeah,
of that scene.
some of them were just moving around the entire time.
Stay still.
The most these are all naked people, by the way.
Yes.
So that's
Whole lot of naked people in this movie.
Whole lot of naked people in this movie. It was the mid 70s. This is what they were going for. But the one that was kind of most interesting, some of them were bloody, which they never went back to. Now that you think about it, why were they in plastic bags? And reflecting on this, I have not thought about that scene since watching the movie.
Well, because a lot happens
What
after
was
that.
going on there?
I don't know.
And some of them like the one lady that had her hair like vacuum sealed up into the bag, which was kind of interesting, but she was definitely also looked like she was having the hardest time breathing.
Yes. Well, I could imagine so, but it's this weird scene, and then the stone head lands somewhere, so he gets out and he's wandering around, and that's then from like partway through the movie, this whole mystery idea of like how he got there and what he's doing there just gets evaporated, and it's like, no, he was drawn there. He was drawn there by someone. And he meets
this
the
is definitely the part of the
Eternals.
movie that he was drawn there part of the movie is definitely something that did not land for me. And one of the biggest problems that I have with the movie, when I read what it was supposed to mean, and it makes sense, but again, that execution factor did not work.
No. After he meets the Eternals, and there's a whole big thing where they're trying to figure out what exactly he is. There's one of them that wants to run experiments on him, but another one that doesn't want anything to do with him. And so the Eternals decide everything by a vote, just a straight democratic vote. And
Psychic democratic vote.
Yes. They are also ageless and immortal. And if they die, they just get basically reconstituted.
Regrown.
Because that's what happens. And we find out that Zed is an exterminator for Zardoz in the Outlands. That was his job. His job was just to run around and kill people.
Yeah, because they're overrunning the planet. We need this planet to be a planet. They don't really explain why.
Nope, no explanations at all. None whatsoever. Yeah, it's
we do. At this point, we are introduced to sort of three of our eternal characters that we actually learn their names to.
Yep.
Consuela, I'm going to say the name as they do, Consuela, yes. Played by Charlotte Rampling, who is she seems to be the de facto leader of all of these people.
Kind of, yeah. I get that feeling, but yet everything's still decided by a vote, and she can get outvoted really easily. So,
yeah. And then her assistant partner, May, who played by Sarah Kestelman, and then we have John Alderton as Friend. Yes. And I had to go back and turn on subtitles to make sure his name was Friend, because that just seemed a little too on the nose.
Yeah, it was a little weird. So now Charlotte Rampling was just in a movie recently, Dune, actually. She was the Reverend Mother in Dune, so she's in that one scene.
Yeah.
And as soon as I read that, I'm like, oh, I see it now. But
yeah,
I had no clue when I'm watching this, because it's 40-something years ago. But she was in
the 1970s are a gap in my movie history. I seem to know movies that came before it and movies that came 80 and later, but the 70s are kind of outside of Star Wars, obviously. But
I'm slowly getting better with some of the stuff in the 70s. Like I know a few of them, the Star Wars, Jaws, but like French Connection is another one. The 1970s were an interesting time for movies, because up until kind of the mid 60s, everything was very studio driven. In the 60s,
every set looked like an actual set on a stage that you could see the tops of and things like that.
Yep.
And the 70s definitely tried to go towards a more gritty, realistic look.
Yeah, so everything is shot on location almost, and the way that the visuals are, the sound. This was I like to call this the era of cacophony, where you'd have these scenes. Like Jaws did this. I remember it in Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Maybe it's just a Spielberg thing. I don't know. No, because I remember it in French Connection too, I'm pretty sure. But you would have like the sound mix in scenes was such that you would have dialogue and you could barely hear the dialogue because there'd be all sorts of people in the background talking and all the sound, just the way everything is mixed. You can kind of pinpoint just by hearing it usually. And this also had a visual thing going on. The cinematographer, whose name escapes me at the moment, I'll find it here in a second.
Jeffrey Unsworth.
Yeah. He shot the movie with the lens wide open and then would use fog filters, and they had a bunch of fog on that. And it gave it this really strange kind of diffused, almost dreamlike look. But the problem with it was when they went to copy the film for distribution, it looked like crap. And so they stopped doing that after this, shortly after this movie. They just didn't do things like that anymore. But
Jeffrey Unsworth, by the way, Oscar winner for cinematography for Cabaret and Tess, which he died during the production of. So,
I think that it works in this movie to have that weird kind of foggy, diffused look on everything. It does very much, for me, date it as like a 70s movie because it's the same sort of look as like Monty Python and the Holy Grail had that same look to it. Some of that's shooting in Ireland and shooting in where they were, but also I think it fits this movie because it's sort of it's a possible future. It's maybe going to happen, but maybe not. So the look of it's a little odd. The colors aren't super saturated, but it's not like drab either.
I don't know. There are colors in here, but I wouldn't necessarily call them bright. Like you've got the super bright red mankini, right. But it is not. But it's still a little muted when you look at it. If you were to shoot this today, that thing would be reflecting light off of the into the camera.
And even all the Eternals,
we're lucky that it's not.
Yeah, the Eternals costumes were very there were a lot of pastel colors and a lot of colors, but not like super saturated colors necessarily. Yeah. I also really liked how the Eternals costumes were kind of androgynous. There wasn't, for the most part, like you could see men or women wearing basically the same thing.
Yeah, it was really interesting. The kind of long shorts. Is that a skirt? Is that a pair of shorts? What have you?
Yeah.
I will say the one thing about the Eternals costumes that, and maybe this is me, I don't know. But after a certain point in the movie where it makes it clear what is going on with the Eternals, I noticed that every single one of them was wearing a leather belt that came to here and then had a big long dip right in the center.
I noticed that too.
It
looked kind of like it was supposed to be sort of a cod piece, but then not.
Yeah,
it was odd. But
I'm gonna regret saying this out loud. Flaccid codpiece is not a thing I ever thought I would say out loud, and especially not in a public space. But here we are.
It wasn't. I didn't have that on my bingo card today. I did not have flaccid codpiece on my bingo card. So
2023 episode 200. Let's take it to the next.
Exactly. This followed the Star Wars rule of nobody wears underwear in the future. So none of not a stitch of underwear on anyone.
Speaking of Star Wars, there were multiple women in this movie that had the side bun hairstyle.
I wonder
a couple of years before Zardoz, or a couple of years before Star Wars existed.
Yeah,
that hairstyle was there. I've never seen THX 1138. I imagine it to be similar in. Not necessarily concept or style, but execution. I imagine them to be kind of similar, like reflections of today's society, but in a super advanced way. And it makes me wonder if George Lucas watched this movie a few times.
I gotta think
in the mid 70s.
He had to have. I mean, as much of a film studier as he was, he definitely would have studied John Borman and known who that was. So there had to have been there's some influence there for sure. But yeah, I loved and look, as we mentioned, a lot of nudity in this, a lot of because for the Eternals, there wasn't emotion the way that we have emotion, right? They had lived for so long that they didn't have, or they were supposedly didn't have emotions and romantic connections and sexual urges and all this kind of stuff. So, they're just sort of like whatever happens. So you'd have people getting naked all over the place, and not on purpose. It was just the way that they would move and the way their clothing would move would be that. So I found that interesting. Because again, it's that idea of like
it's a very late 60s, mid 70s idea of that.
But also it's an interesting idea of like immortality and how it would change you over time, and how like they had these different groups. So there was the Eternals, and they had some kind of psychic ability too, which was never explained or defined. Some of them had it, some of them, or at least some of them demonstrated it.
Yeah, I think they all have it because that's how they vote and do all this stuff. And also, I was reading this. I didn't clock this in the movie when it happened. They don't sleep. They just meditate with blankets over their heads.
Yeah.
Which I didn't clock that was what was going on. But
yeah, there's a scene that does mention that like sleep became irrelevant and was replaced by level 2 meditation. Whatever level, why level 2? What's level 1 meditation? They don't really
look. I'm stuck at 0.5.
But then there are splinters of the Eternals that we meet, because there's the renegades who are the punishment for Eternals, because Eternals don't age. They are immortal and ageless.
I love this concept, by the way. This is one of the things I'm like, I love this idea.
Exactly. Again, yes, exactly. Like, this is one of those just, wow, this is a cool idea. I want to see it in a better executed thing.
Yes.
Because they don't age, punishment for doing something wrong is to be aged. You still don't die, but you get older. So a minor infraction might give you 3 months of aging or 6 months of aging, or something more could give you 5 years.
Yeah. We see one person admit to their crime and they get 5 years of aging, but they look like a pretty young person, so it's really not going to matter that much to them.
No, but
I say as someone who's approaching 40 and my back hurts all the time.
Yeah, I'm on the wrong side of 40 and it doesn't get better. So, but it's one of those, like, the thing about it is it's supposed to be the punishment, but then it doesn't really change you at all. Except that, as you get older,
it doesn't change you until a certain point.
Yes,
and that's where I find it absolutely fascinating. That the renegades, and we learn later why these particular group are the renegades and why they're all super old. Mm-hmm. But you basically have the renegades that are all, I'm gonna say plus 80. This was the 70s, so you might adjust that number down a little bit, but these are all the old and gray, senile people, and yes, they're still alive, but they're being punished because they're losing their mental faculties and don't necessarily know what's going on, and all of this, and that idea really works. The execution isn't being kind of a weird 40s nightclub with a bunch of old people in it. Doesn't necessarily work for me, but I get it, I guess.
No, that was a little strange, but like, again, that idea, because so there is a role-playing game called Vampire the Masquerade. And in that, vampires are effectively immortal, but they do age. It just takes a lot longer. And what can end up happening with some of the really, really old vampires is they age to a point where their body starts to break down regardless, because it just the physical body can only handle it for so long. And it's that idea of immortality, but you're stuck like that, is interesting to me. So this thought, or this theory of like, all right, we're going to age you up, and eventually you're going to get into your, you're going to age up into your 80s, and everything's not going to work, and you're going to be stuck bedridden, but you're alive. And so all these renegades are here, and they're losing it. They're losing their mental faculties. Physically, they can't really do anything anymore half the time.
Honestly, the ones that are losing it are the lucky ones, because they don't necessarily know what's going on. It's the guy in the bed, who I believe is only credited as old scientist. That's just like in bed, like hooked up to. Well, is he hooked up to machines? I can't remember. But he's just like completely bedridden, conscious of what's going on. But like, imagine that for an eternity. That is really terrifying and really horrible punishment.
And they're longing for death. Like, these renegades want death as a release from what they're going through. And then on the flip side of it, you've got And they're never explained exactly how this happens. It's just some kind of a disease, they call it. The apathetics, which are young people. They don't commit any crimes.
Well,
they just
young looking, eternally old people.
Yeah, they've been around for however long, but they just don't care about it. They just stand around and I guess maybe eat occasionally, because there is the scene where friend who has Zed basically working like a slave for him, has him running a rickshaw through the town as he just chucks bread at people.
They're throwing green baguettes at people. This is green bread. They're just this twist.
Yeah, it's like braided challah, but green, and he's just throwing it at them as he goes down the street. But the apathetics literally do nothing. Like the scene where he's explaining it to Sean Connery is both a weird and definitely a scene you wouldn't do today in the same form
the stuff that happens in that scene is uncomfortable for at least two reasons.
Mm-hmm.
Many more, honestly, because especially what that reaction has in the apathetics.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I don't know how far to go with that, because it's so wrong.
It gets a little consent is real and important. Let's put it that way. And the apathetics cannot give consent. So, but the part of it that stuck with me more than that, because I tried not to pay too much attention to that part, was as Friend is explaining things and he's walking away, and there's a bunch of the apathetics standing there, and he's just like picking one's arm up, and their arm just kind of stays in the air, and then it slowly comes back down as they just kind of stand there, or he turns somebody, because they just don't do anything. And again, it's an interesting idea or concept of like, is this an actual disease? Is there some sort of a virus that's causing this in people, or is it like a mental break that they're having? Like, what's causing this apathy in them? And that would be something interesting to explore in a novel or a longer form. I also thought a comic series would be interesting for this, because the visuals part of it as well. But something where you can really dive into a lot of these side things that they threw in there that make for interesting world building without the time to tell us anything about it. They're just like, yeah, the apathetics, and then they show up. They're important later for reasons, kind of, but they just all have this blank stare on their face until one of them gets a little taste of Connery sweat later, and then that's
the apathetics are the part that again, 1970s. I'm gonna say it because this is just, this part of the movie, quite frankly, sucks. I hate this. It's wrong and it's bad. After what Connery's character does to one of the apathetics earlier in the movie, they return to the apathetic village. They're all part of the same vortex, which is a whole other thing. All of a sudden, that has taught them not to be apathetic anymore.
I guess it's really hard to say. I'm not entirely sure.
They start licking sweat and then kissing each other, and it's 70s. Is all I can think about that. It's just,
and it's an interesting scene there, because he ends up in that village because he's just on the run. He's running, he's hiding, and there's a bunch of apathetics there, and one of them, who happened to be the woman that he grabbed earlier, she like gets a little bit of sweat and kind of puts it on her lips, and then it wakes something up in her, and she turns and kisses one person and then kisses someone else, and it just spreads, and suddenly the apathetics are no longer apathetic and they want stuff now. But again, for reasons. Like that's all we get.
I mean, again, it's all tied to this sort of sexual repression that all Eternals face, and that Sean Connery's hairy, sweaty body just awakens things in people.
I mean, look, it's Sean Connery, right? So I guess that works for you. On the plus side, he can pull off the leather mankini because he's not going to get as cold. He's got all that extra fuzz on him.
He's got the fur. Yeah.
He's a hairy man. He really is. But yeah, so what is it? At like the hour mark is when we learn, we have the whole sort of reveal of what he was actually doing and why he's in there.
Which this to me, on paper, I love. I love on paper what this character is and what this character has been doing. In this movie, I hate it.
All right, so break it down for me. Explain to me what it is you like about this on paper.
So what I like about this on paper, and part of this is colored by stuff from the novelization that I picked up in researching for this. So Zed as a character, we learn he is, as we previously mentioned, he is one of the executioner brutals. He is a brutal just like all the other brutals in the real world outside of the vortex and all the other, special phrases. But the executioners are the only ones that were allowed to breed.
Yes.
And the idea is that Zardoz and Arthur Frayne, who will start coming more into play after this, has been, and by the way, this part is not in the movie. This part is based on inference and stuff from the novelization. Arthur Frayne has been using these executioner brutals to breed basically superhumans, supermen, perfect individuals that he then wants to introduce the perfect version of back into eternal society to wreak havoc and basically end immortality.
Yep.
Again, all that, as you hear about it, sounds kind of cool.
And they very briefly touch on it in the movie. Like it's mentioned at one point in dialogue, but it's literally, if you're so confused by the time of this in the movie that dialogue is just flying past you and you're not going to catch it. So they mentioned like Frayne was doing his experiments and he was basically doing all this stuff kind of off the reservation, or not. I don't like that phrase. I'm sorry. On his own, unsanctioned.
Yeah. Well, and they say that he was doing his experiments, but at the time they've also introduced the idea that the executioners are no longer killing people; they're now capturing them to farm grain. And so it's like, is the experiment to farm grain? There's just a lot going on.
Yeah.
That storytelling wise, just stuff doesn't quite match. And the way that it is explained in this movie is that you have the character May, one of the Eternals, who is trying to interrogate Zed again, but she's doing it under a blanket with him. There's some context for that because May has seemed to be a little obsessed with Zed since he arrived.
Little bit.
And then all of a sudden, like, she realizes that, oh, he's got more intellectual capacity than any of us, or whatever she says in that moment. I should have made a note of what exactly she says, but she basically kind of lays down that he is smarter than all the Eternals. And then they start using the computer. There's an AI. There's an Alexa in this. There's a Siri called Tabernacle that all sorts of gets involved here. That then they download all of their collective information into his brain, and then
at one point they devise the plan of like, okay, we're going to move forward with this plan of disrupting our society by giving you all of our knowledge so that you can basically break everything we have. Like that's May.
Yes.
And May and Friend come up with this plan. This is after Friend, by the way, gets sent to the Renegades in another very weird scene where they all kind of, it's a scene that goes on for far too long where they're around the table.
Yeah.
And they all stand up and are doing the psychic like juju at him. And he's just sitting there taking it all before finally he gets sentenced to aging and he becomes a renegade. But only half of him ages.
Well, he's like half renegade.
Yeah.
He's half normal.
Exactly. But so Friend and May come up with this idea. So then, then Zed gets fed all the knowledge so that he can figure out how to destroy the tabernacle. Because the tabernacle, which, by the way, if you like the word tabernacle, you hear it a lot in the movie. So
yeah, at least past the 56-minute mark.
yes, but destroying that will remove the source of immortality, which is what Friend is going for. May's idea was more to use Zed to breed into the Eternals because she views him as the superior thing. But she's kind of outvoted because Zed's sort of like, that's a dumb idea. I like this idea better. Because his whole thing, and this is another one of those reveals that it didn't quite land, and you can be very confused at this point. He is in the vortex because he was bred as an exterminator and then suddenly was told by his god Zardoz to stop exterminating and start rounding them all up and having them farm grain. And that didn't make any sense to him and his brutal friends, his exterminators, so they devised a plan that the next time the giant stone head came along, he would hide in the pile of grain and stow away. But during that, he forgot what he was doing. Like it somehow wiped his memory, which I guess there's no reason is given for that.
There is some implication because Arthur Frayne is on the Zardoz head when that happens, and Zed shoots Arthur Frayne, that Arthur Frayne had something to do with that memory loss or that confusion. Okay. Again, this is stuff that I'm reading after the fact.
Because the way that it's depicted in the movie, especially at the start of it, is that Zed doesn't know why he's there. Like, he just sort of wakes up in there. And Arthur Frayne, in that moment at the beginning of the movie, seems very confused that he's there. But then towards the end of the movie, it's like, no, I set all that up. I meant for you to be there. Because we find out that Zardoz, in one of the... I want to call it it's a fairly clever reveal of where the name Zardoz came from, but at the same time also really, really stupid. Zardoz, there's a moment... Oh, go ahead. You have something.
Yeah, I was going to say, so after Zardoz, the Godhead, has told the executioners to start capturing people to farm, Zed leads a group of people into what looks like a half-destroyed city and finds himself, like, I believe he literally says, and then I saw a face, and then behind him there is a hooded face in a window going like,
yep.
And so he runs into this building that we learn is a library, and all of a sudden the hooded face starts teaching him how to read, and then he reads every book and becomes super smart. Good old Zed is a super smart guy now that he's read every book. Mm-hmm. And then he picks, and then he finally reads the one book, the book that explains everything.
But at first he doesn't want to say what it is. He's like repressing the memory. And so it takes them a long time to get around to it. But eventually that book is...
The Wizard of Oz. Zardoz.
And that's our big reveal, is that's where Zardoz came from.
Bum, bum, bum.
Which,
I mean, it makes sense. I mean, it does make sense because you have Arthur Frayne as the man behind the curtain, the person that's controlling everything, that, putting on one face as Zardoz when he's got a mustache painted on his face the rest of the time.
And he even mentions, he's a magician by trade. So he's every time they show him and depict him later on in the movie, he's doing, he's wearing the top hat, doing like sleight of hand style magic, which I thought was clever. Like I didn't hate that. It was silly, and it was dumb in all the best ways.
There's a lot of stuff in this movie that is silly.
But so that reveal happens, and then it's like, so Sean Connery, so Zed came here for revenge. Basically, he was upset at Zardoz for making him stop killing people and start making them farm. And so the idea was that he would stow away and find a way for the executioners to get into the vortex.
And this is the part of the movie that because this is like there's still an hour left of the movie as we have this part, and this is the part that bothers me so much, because if this was going to be a huge reveal that he's been playing a game the whole time and tricking these Eternals and all of that stuff, I need to actually understand that that's what's been going on.
Right.
But that did not land at all.
No, it really doesn't. It just feels like they tried to shift things halfway through the movie and go from it being some sort of a weird mystery of how he got there to, oh no, this was the plan the whole time, and now, you know, we're gonna start doing this, and it goes from like a whodunit to like the Great Escape, and now they've got their plan that they've got to do, but Consuela
and there are several what seem to be time jumps that happen here that are
there were quite a few of those. Time is very weird because time, and I sort of understand it from the aspect of the Eternals, where like time doesn't really mean anything to them anymore. Yeah, and time is different inside the vortex, but it's not portrayed well, and we're not given the contextual clues we need to really fully understand how long.
The only real reason I can tell is because Sean Connery gets more and more of a shirt.
Yes. As
the time goes on. Still keeps the mankini going.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, rocking that.
His upper body covered.
And then, oh, man, there's all sorts of stuff with, like, Consuela at one point wants nothing more than to, like, she didn't want him there at all in the first place.
I also hate this scene.
Is this the one where he's inside the little plastic bubble?
No, that one was okay. It was the scene that I'm talking about is when she finally confronts him after she is she has her people literally hunting him down, and she finally corners him, and he says something.
Oh,
and she literally falls to her knees in love with him.
Yes.
Come on.
Like, there are forced romances in films, and then there's what they did in Zardoz, which makes zero sense whatsoever.
Supposedly, according to the novelization, the idea is that she has been attracted to Zed since the moment he came into the picture.
Mm-hmm.
But because it has been so long that she had felt that kind of attraction to another person, she had no idea what those feelings were.
Mm-hmm.
And she became uncomfortable and turned that into hatred and stuff that would work in a better crafted movie, but is not present in this one.
No, the closest we get is the scene where she's giving the anatomy lesson, and then they try to use imagery to make Zed, we'll just say, make Zed erect. And it finally ends with him staring at her, and like that's as close as we get to any sort of thing between the two of them. So it just didn't play well. Like they didn't get that across at all, that she was repressing any sort of feelings for him, because even in that scene she looks disgusted at the mere thought of it. But then that's the energy she carries all the way through until she drops to her knees in love with him in that scene. And it's like, whoa, that was sudden. That was fast. And that was very sudden. But
I guess we got to wrap this movie up then, huh?
They're like, well, runtime, we're almost done here. I mean, if anyone, it should have been, the way that the movie went, it should have been May. That would have made more sense.
Zed and May had their own thing going on, as well as all of May's compatriots that she wanted to.
When they did their touch teaching.
Well, they do have a time jump forward that implies that they did complete May's plan of continuing on to the next generation, I'll say.
Gotcha. Interesting. But then then we get to the real, even as weird as the movie has been to this point, the real weirdness comes when the girl who she had the Leia buns, and the blonde girl who would just randomly break into singing and kind of got everyone's attention, which I didn't.
It's important to note that after 2 hours, I only learned 4 characters' names.
Yeah.
In this
Oh, I don't remember her name at all. I just remember her as being the one that would like stand up from the table, put her arms out, and sing a note, and then everyone would pay attention to whatever she was going to say. She talks to Zed and tells him that he is going to help save them all and give her the release of death. And she gives him a crystal, and that crystal is important because it's a transmitter. And somehow or another, through all the osmosis of knowledge that that Zed gets, he figures out that the crystal is a transmitter, but also unlocks the secret that it is light refraction, and that's storing the information. And it basically
we also learned that all the Eternals have crystals in their foreheads, which we had not known.
Oh yeah, that was what, an hour and a half into the movie before we learned that.
And I've got this crystal. I'm gonna look inside it, see what I can see.
And he does, and he sees like a jellyfish basically, and then
Yeah.
It's revealed that that's the tabernacle. There's also at one point, Friend talks. It's either Friend or Arthur Frayne talks about how the vortex is a ship, that it's a spaceship, that they traveled to the stars, and that didn't help them at all. That didn't give them anything.
That didn't help them anywhere, so they came back. Why? They've only been. I did read that apparently it's only been 300 years since this has happened, which is a shockingly short amount of time to go exploring the galaxy. But
I mean, we don't know what kind of propulsion that ship has, so maybe they can get around quick. But like that was a thing where they sort of drop that and then like just forget about it. Like, oh, it's space, whatever. It came from space or it's a ship. Who cares? Whatever. Move on. But they eventually, Zed finds himself inside the tabernacle.
You mean inside the end palace of Enter the Dragon?
Yeah, exactly.
That's what I was reminded of.
It was just a hall of mirrors with weird. That was where I got the big Richard Williams vibes of like I could just see this where like it's animated and sort of again Ralph Bakshi, Richard Williams, that 70s era animation stuff. I could totally see that because it's just Sean Connery running around in a hall of mirrors, talking about the tabernacle and pointing a gun at everything, but never once firing it. And he does that a lot in this movie. He points a lot of guns.
Yeah, he does. The only time I think he fires the gun is at the camera in the opening scenes of the movie. For
some reason.
That gun, by the way, was a real gun. I didn't think it was because it was a revolver that you could pull back and cock like a.
Yeah, it was a semi-automatic revolver, which is weird. It's a rare one. I remember I've read about those before, and I had a friend of mine who told me about that. It was a revolver that the recoil would actually cycle the cylinder.
And it supposedly was super accurate because it would not move very much, unlike a lot of repeating, pistols at the time. I can't find which one it is, but it was really weird to see him pull back a revolver. I'd never seen that before.
I had forgotten completely about it. So when he did that at the beginning of the movie, I'm like, that's a strange thing to do, but okay. But then I'm like, sci-fi movie, whatever. They got their own thing going on.
Their own stuff.
But he basically goes inside the tabernacle and figures out how to stop it. I think. I don't know. Again, in a movie that's very confusing and very weird, this is probably the weirdest part.
And he amazingly does it by shooting an old version of himself dressed as he was at the beginning of the movie.
Yeah. Which I'm sure probably is meant to be some sort of statement, but
again, because I was looking stuff up about this movie, that is him. It's a Webley Fosbury revolver, by the way.
Oh, okay.
If that means anything to anybody, but apparently that was him fully moving on from his past as an executioner brutal by destroying that part of himself. He is now fully embraced who he has become as this super intelligent mortal savior of humanity, I guess.
Sure, that works because then he ends up with Consuela, and the very ending of the movie is, well, I mean, they basically go through their entire life but sitting in one spot the whole time.
Sitting in one spot wearing one thing.
Yeah, because you see them and then you see her pregnant, and then it's them with a child, and then it's just them getting older as the child grows up. Again, always wearing the exact same thing until it's the child gets up to leave.
It's
and
like, bye, Mom and Dad, looking like Commandy, the last boy from DC Comics.
Yes.
I appreciate you knowing that reference.
And then he gets up to leave. She kind of reaches after him like, no, don't go, my son. And Zed takes her hand, and then they sit there, and they just get older and older, and then turn into skeletons. And that's the end of the movie.
Yep. That's
if you enjoyed the final 20 minutes of 2001: A Space Odyssey, then I'm sure that ending makes perfect sense to you.
Yeah.
If like me, you liked the visuals of the end of 2001: A Space Odyssey, but the meaning behind it was lost, this ending is also doesn't make any sense.
They definitely saved a lot of money on music by using Beethoven's Seventh Symphony and over and over again.
It's this weird, as big and grandiose as parts of this movie were, and then for the ending to just be a two-shot of two people growing old, which I guess is supposed to be moving on from whatever the Eternals were.
So again, there's parts of this that I like. One thing that I do like is that we don't actually learn about what happened to the outside world after this. I kind of appreciate that for this 70s super pretentious piece of art. For the audio listeners, I did do air quotes. But
yes.
But it's also just, this is right after a crazy bloodbath where Zed's executioner buddies have rolled in and have just been killing everyone.
Oh man, they just mow them down, and like the renegades, happier than pigs in slop the whole time. They're just like, we want to die, and they're just getting shot left and right. And the apathetics are there, and the apathetics suddenly have a zest for life and are having sex everywhere while getting killed.
Yes, and they love that too.
Yeah, they're all about
the Leia Bun's singing girl that we mentioned earlier, she confronts Zed's like, well, now that you've destroyed the tabernacle, kill me.
Yeah.
And he says something like, all that I once was is gone, and walks away, only for her then to be shot by someone else.
Yeah. Yeah, one of his executioner buddies
executioner crew.
And that pretty much ends it, but it's weird. But I do have to say, like, again, from a conceptual standpoint, I liked what they were trying to do, which is why I think that this is, I can understand for a lot of people this is unwatchable. Like, this is just bad. Totally get that. And if that's, you really have to be willing to just take it for like a weird piece of art and don't try to think about it too much and just sort of experience what's on the screen. Yeah. You might get some enjoyment out of it, and you can kind of see those concepts are really cool. There's also some good visuals to it, I will say.
There's some cool stuff. Everything with the projection ring, kind of neat.
That was really cool.
There's a lot of like mid-70s, like, realistic cinematography framework that looks really neat.
Yeah. The giant stone head floating, and like those wide shots where it would be floating over, where obviously it's superimposed, but like they look nice. There's a really great shot when the Eternals kind of flip and decide that they're going to try to kill Zed. There's a shot where they're running up with like a battering ram, and you see them running towards a door. And once they reach the door is when you realize that the shot is actually of a mirror, and they're running into that mirror. And I thought that was really well done, because it does look like they're coming straight at you until all of a sudden, like, the battering ram just comes in from the side of frame and hits the mirror, and it shatters. And I was like, that's, Borman had some good visuals for stuff like that. It's just
funny.
weird.
I don't remember that moment at all, because at that point I was just like, what is going on in this movie?
Yeah. Oh no, there's a lot of that. There's plenty of that. So I can see it. But if you can put yourself through watching it again, look for that shot, because I thought that was kind of cool. Some of the weird, again, inside the tabernacle with all the mirrors is trippy, but it's like visually kind of interesting. There's a good amount of that. So don't look at this as I'm going to sit down and watch a fun narrative movie, because you're going to hate every second of it if that's the case.
I tried to convince my wife watched this with me, and we're big Mystery Science Theater 3000 fans, so I was like, oh, we're gonna watch this terrible movie, one of the worst movies ever made, Zardoz. She was like, okay, I like bad movies. And about an hour into it, she just looked at me and said, I am mad at you. Don't want to finish watching this. She hated it.
Weird,
but it's all.
Go ahead.
It's also weird because, again, I think that concepts in this movie really work. And I would say, I can't believe I'm going to say this out loud about Zardoz. 6 to 8 episode HBO Max remake, HBO remake of Zardoz with the right people behind it, I could honestly see working.
Yeah.
Is that weird?
No, it's not, because it's a high concept thing. And I come back to this a lot with a lot of high concept movies. I did this with Titan AE, was a movie that I felt like was very high concept and deserved to be a longer series to explore some things. This would do that. I think that's why I kept thinking, a novel or a book series, a comic series or a series of graphic novels, or a limited run kind of streaming series would work for this, because it's that high concept. There's some cool things there. The execution of Zardoz itself was, there's not enough time in an hour and 45 minutes to tell everything they wanted to tell. And they were doing just crates of drugs. And so it's weird. But also, and that led to certain scenes just going on for too long while other things were just brushed past. So I think if you give this the opportunity to breathe a little bit, and you can explore some of these side bits the way that they deserve and give them context, I do think it could work. So I'm with you in that it makes no sense. It's never going to happen. Like, it's just not. There's nobody.
Never. No one's going to touch Zardoz again.
Not at all.
I do.
But it'd be interesting.
I do want to finish talking about this by bringing up Roger Ebert's review of this movie. Roger Ebert gave this movie 2.5 stars. Now, I don't know if Ebert is a 4-star or 5-star person, but the last moment of his review, every once in a while, a movie like this comes along, a movie you've got to see so that you too can be in the dark about it. In the movie's own terms, this much can be said for sure. It may not make you an apathetic, but it will certainly age you by 2 hours.
Oh, that's brilliant. And it's true. Like, we aren't even doing a good job of explaining what this movie is when you watch it.
The movie doesn't explain a good job of what this movie is when you watch it.
But it is an experience that I think, if you can be in the right mindset, I think there's something to take away from that experience. And maybe that's the potential LSD talking. I don't know. I'm just not sure. But like, there's something there. There's something there that I think is intriguing, but it's wrapped up in this weird, just doesn't make any sense and poorly executed package. That
it's a movie that is entirely too long, but also not long enough.
Yes. Yep. Absolutely. Like, there's a fun, interesting piece at the center, but it's coated in just the weirdest tasting stuff, and you got to get through that. You got to like somehow endure that to enjoy, and that's kind of a tough bar to clear for some people. Like, there's many people I know personally that I would never suggest watch Zardoz, because I wouldn't want to tell them like, well, okay, once you can get past this, and this, you might enjoy something, because they're just people that I know don't want to do that, don't have the time to do that, and it's not worth it to them. But at the same time, like, if you're kind of curious about it at all, I think it's worth. I wouldn't spend money on this. If it ever shows up on a streaming service again that you're subscribed to and you're bored one night and you want to watch it, I would do that. But I wouldn't go out of your way seeking this out. But there's some interesting stuff there. And there's also some really fun, kind of weird, goofy audio that I had to capture some of this because...
Oh, gosh. Please tell me you have some of the weird eternal language that only shows up in one scene.
Are you talking about when he's talking backwards?
Is it backwards? It seems
I don't
like
know what it was. It made no sense to me at all, and it happens one time, and then it's never referenced again.
In the subtitles, because I had to turn the subtitles on, it just says speaking foreign language.
Well, let's see. So, okay, here's Friend. This one's called Boredom.
Anything to relieve the boredom.
Oh, it was the way he said that. Boredom. This guy's been alive for way too long.
This movie is kind of campy in ways that, like, it leans into in some ways and leans away from in other ways. Like, it doesn't quite know what to do with it.
Another Friend line. I got a few of his because there was just something with his delivery. He kind of embraced the campy aspects of his character.
Well, I think he's also the character that speaks more than anybody else in the movie.
Also true.
We didn't mention this. Zed's first line does not happen until 15 minutes into the film.
Yeah. Yeah, Connery doesn't talk a whole lot at all in the movie, and he doesn't say anything for the first ton of it. But this is another Friend.
Death comes closer for us all.
Oh, yeah, death comes close. And this is when they're learning or they're figuring out that Zed can do something, and all the renegades are... Because you can hear them partying in the background, like they're happy about this.
Woo!
Let's see. This one is just called Erection. This ought to be fun.
Is capable of spontaneous and reflexive erection.
Again, wasn't something that when I started this movie I thought I was going to hear at all. It's in a just very clinical scene where she's explaining to the Eternals how a Wangdoodle works.
With drawings.
Yes,
that
drawings.
is one line that they did. That is one line that they did not cross. Is they did not have any actual pictures of anything.
Nope.
Just drawings.
Lots of boobs, but no wangs. Innocent, I believe, is what this one's called.
I am innocent of psychic violence.
It was that just monotone kind of serial killer delivery. I am innocent of psychic violence.
Well, he only got 5 years. So, also we have to mention the Eternals. A lot of the Eternals wear this sort of like almost Egyptian
headscarf thing. Yeah,
scarf thing.
I didn't get that, but I'm sure.
I mean, when you, I mean, that's the style, you know.
Sure. After 300 years.
Go forth and kill.
I mean, you know, when my God speaks to me from a giant floating stone head and tells me that, sure, it makes sense.
And then vomits guns all over the place.
Yeah. Just all
and
over.
And ammo, not in boxes, loose ammo.
Just loose ammo. So that was after he had said,
"The gun is good."
Because the gun is good, but
the penis is evil.
No penis. Lots. Yes, gun. So yeah, that whole opening scene is just bizarre.
It's just
and
wild.
Does not prepare you for the movie in any way.
No, because you think that's gonna like, and it's this again. It's that to Zed waking up in the head with all the people in plastic bags.
Yeah.
What is that?
I don't know.
What is that?
I don't know. And then every
breaking
turn,
my brain. Bring this back up because I didn't even think about it in the moment because it was so much after that that never returned. What?
Yeah.
Are those experiments? Are those people that are being bred by Arthur Frayne?
Yeah, I don't know. Like every turn in this movie was a left, and it was just strange. Okay, so now I have a thing where if somebody laughs, I usually capture it because I just love those, like, especially when it's you can tell it's that fake put on laugh, and this was Friend. And I don't know why, I just liked that one. That one for some reason just he kind of gave up halfway through it too as he's walking away. He's like, yeah, whatever, I'm done. I don't remember this one.
You have penetrated me.
Well, I
Well, Tabernacle, not on a first date.
my oh. That was the dialogue for the first 5 minutes of the movie was just hooping, whooping, and praise be to Zardoz.
With those mankinis and those Zardoz double-sided masks, and some of the most of the masks were white, but some of them were red.
I will
But they
say,
looked like they were.
those masks were pretty incredible.
They were one, super dope, and two, all of the ones that were red looked like they had been painted red with blood, or at least with something red that you would be able to find in some sort of apocalypse.
Yeah.
So I just presume blood, but that's pretty dope.
Yeah. This, I believe, is another from the Zardoz head.
The penis shoots seeds.
Yeah, I mean...
No wonder he wanted them to get into farming.
But the penis is evil. And now he wants seeds. I'm getting mixed messages, Zardoz, is what I'm saying. I did like... So that whole opening with the floating head is so ridiculous, and you could pick all sorts of moments from that, but the ending of it was...
Is God in show business too?
And then it ends. I was like, it's an odd one to
It's
put
so
in
funny
there.
that you said the end with the floating head, because Zardoz is a floating head.
Yeah.
That I was a little confused for a second, but now again, is this me putting this together? Of course he's a floating head because he is Zardoz, and Zardoz is a floating head.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, like, man, if I was high right now, I'd be like, oh, dude,
I know.
figured it out.
This was May when she makes the realization of what Zed is.
You must know that you're mentally and physically vastly superior to me or anyone else here.
And at that point, if I'm Zed, it's like, well, there's an ego stroke if ever I've heard one. Like, all right.
Yeah, he doesn't have psychic powers though, so
No. No, and he can't really figure out how things work, but he's apparently vastly superior because he is.
I get, and once again, that line comes out of nowhere.
It's just like suddenly he is that. We've had no indication of it whatsoever, but then she figures that out by looking at, I guess, something in his eyes. I'm not really even sure how she figured that out. And finally, one last one, and it was just the use of this term I'd never heard nor expected to hear.
We will touch teach you, and you will give us your seed.
Touch teach.
Well, because they've been touching.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, they're going to learn through
touching
osmosis.
brains. Yeah, they do say that. They do talk about osmosis, don't they?
And that was like so I took that as a literal. They were just going to like put their hands on Zed and transfer data to him, like he's a wireless charger, and then he would give them his seed. It's a bizarre movie, people. Is what we're trying to. It's basically what we're driving at. It's a very bizarre movie.
And I can't believe I'm walking away with things that I like about it. That's the thing that really gets me. It's like, oh, I enjoy this for some reason.
Yeah,
but I mostly didn't enjoy it. Most of the time, me watching this movie was really.
So, if it hadn't been for a show like this, I would have really been upset watching this movie.
Yes,
but I will say that I am open to watching it again, and especially with the right group of friends, to just like, this could be the kind of movie that you have a group of friends over and you have a few drinks and you just watch, like, we're gonna just watch a crap movie, like some crazy zany movie, throw this on and people just have fun with it. And like,
this is the type of 2-hour movie that takes 4.5 hours to watch.
Yes,
because every 5 seconds you're going to pause it and talk about something and point out something and have some sort of weird conversation about it.
But it's also like a movie, I feel like this not only wouldn't it get made today, but movies like this don't really happen anymore. These really, I shouldn't say they don't, but they're not as prominent anymore. These really, really high concept, way out there type of things.
Well, I think it's less that they don't happen, but it's more that in 1976. Is that when this movie came out?
74.
74, sorry. In 1974, not everybody could make a movie.
True.
Today, in 2023, you and a group of people could make this with a smartphone and a computer and in a weekend and put it out somewhere. And so you don't have a lot of big budget. Well, not that this had a huge budget, but you don't get a lot of theatrically released movies like this anymore. The movies that you do get released that are of this kind of ilk are typically much better done because because the studio system is so much bigger, the editorial is so much bigger. It takes so much for a movie to get made today, but also it is so easy to make a movie today.
Yeah. And the closest I could think of to something like this, and it's a much better, I think, produced film, but because it takes a certain kind of filmmaker to get something at this scale that's this out there. And so like John Boorman at the time could pull that off, right? Because he'd just come off of Deliverance and he had that track record. And it's similar to like, say, Christopher Nolan doing Tenet, which is a weird, out there, high concept movie. It's not a one-to-one comparison. And it's not a one-to-one comparison, but like Christopher Nolan has the pull with studios to be able to do something that's more along that line. But even there, like he executed, whether you like the movie or not, he executed his vision, I think, better than what Boorman did.
But I still think with a director like Christopher Nolan in this age, it might say written and directed by Christopher Nolan, but what it means is written and directed by Christopher Nolan and a bunch of other people.
Oh, sure.
that were editing and adding scenes and changing scenes and B unit and all sorts of stuff that you didn't necessarily have in 74 for a film like this.
This is true. So I do think it's an interesting time capsule for filmmaking. It's an interesting concept that I would love. Honestly, a novel of this, like, and not the novelization, but like taking the themes and the ideas of this and really writing it out in a good long form, either one long novel or a series of a few books, would be really interesting. Because I think that, again, I'm with you. The concept of this world intrigues me. It's just Zardoz as a execution of that concept was lacking. I think is a kind way to put it. I think too, it sort of wastes Sean Connery in some ways. A person with that kind of magnetism and that sort of star power and presence on screen, and he could have been anybody in this.
He needed to be shirtless wearing a Speedo to even be noticed in this movie, which is an interesting comparison.
Yeah, when you're talking about Sean Connery, who, just everything that he did. I mean, how many people can outshine somebody like Harrison Ford, but Sean Connery can pull that off in Last Crusade, or, what he did in all sorts of movies through the 80s and 90s. And for him to just sort of melt into the background, which credit to him for not taking over, but at the same time, because he was the star of the movie, though. He really needed to take over. Well, yes, but what I mean by that is like he played the character that he was given, as opposed to being Sean Connery as the character, if that makes sense. And so it's a credit to him in that respect, but at the same time, it just sort of like you could insert almost anyone in that, and it wouldn't have made a single difference to this movie. So it's a weird, interesting movie, but it's a great choice for, like, it's such a good choice to talk about, and to kind of, for a milestone episode like this for me, the 200th episode, to finally say I've seen Zardoz now.
I know. I also, could you imagine Burt Reynolds in this role?
Boy, that would have been. Now there's one where you would have seen Burt Reynolds, like, no, and that's sort of what I mean by, like, normally with Sean Connery, regardless of how good he is in something, you still see Sean Connery, right? Like, you see Sean Connery in Indiana Jones or in what was the any of them, like any movie basically. But this
the one where they go to Alcatraz.
The Rock. But it's Sean Connery. This would have definitely 100% been like, that's Burt Reynolds as Zed. Would have been interesting to me.
Another alternate universe I would like to visit just to see that version of this movie.
Yes. Oh boy, if this movie isn't weird enough as it is, let's throw Burt Reynolds in there with a bunch of you had all most of the actors were from like Ireland and the UK. The extras were all Irish. And they were like Irish
because they didn't ship anybody in. They had to have them all there.
No, and according to Borman, they were some of the best extras he ever worked with. So
also according to Borman, it was complicated because not all of them wanted to be topless all the time. But that's a whole other conversation.
Yeah. Again, this movie definitely liked having topless people. Lots of naked women.
It's a complicated past, this movie.
Yeah. But hey, I've seen it now. You've seen it now. We can say that. We can get the T-shirts that say "I've seen Zardoz," so you don't have to. I might make that a T-shirt.
Available on tvstravis.com.
Yes, the newly redesigned tvstravis.com. No, this was a ton of fun, Drew. I love having you on because it's always a great conversation. You're one of my favorite guests to bring on because you always bring something interesting, and I love now your main show that you do, The More You Nerd, is I've been listening. I'm a little bit behind, but I've really been enjoying Candy Christmas.
Yes,
you guys were having fun with that.
It was a super fun time. My wife and I watched Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. I saw that for the first time at Thanksgiving, and she actually said, "Why don't you just cover John Candy movies for Christmas?" And she actually wanted to call it Christmas Candy, and then I messed up. But she doesn't know that I messed up because she doesn't listen to my show.
Hey.
So nobody tell her.
I won't. The secret is safe with me. But to let people know where that show is and kind of what you guys do there.
Yeah, so we are The More You Nerd, where we are a decade plus now. I think we're 11 years plus in doing stuff based on just kind of what we want to cover. And sometimes it's really topical. Like right now in this January of 2023, we are talking the entire month about Japanese superhero Ultraman. Which has been really fun and interesting. And weirdly, there's a movie coming to theaters this week. So, maybe we'll see it. I don't know yet. But, it's been a ton of fun. But we cover all sorts of stuff. We've done, Travis, you've been on our show 2 or 3 times now. I can't remember how many.
Yeah, a couple times. I know we talked about Tron once.
My co-host Miles has been on this show. And hopefully he'll be back on soon here too. But
yeah, he will.
But yeah, we just kind of cover stuff that we want to talk about. And coming up this year, we might talk about a syndicated TV show and do a deep dive. We'll cover some anime in a couple of months, and just kind of whatever we decide to do that seems like a slightly more skewed take on nerd stuff. That's themoreyouNerd.com. And yes, I am wearing a Gundam t-shirt. Somebody's called
nice.
it
I
out.
do like one of the things I love about the show is that you and Miles you pick stuff that you really want to talk about and you dive into it, and it's not the same thing every time. It's a TV series here, books, it's comics, it's movies, and then inside of that can be sci-fi or comedy. I mean, taking a month to talk about John Candy and talk about Uncle Buck. Or SCTV. Like you started talking about SCTV, and I was like, oh, I loved SCTV growing up.
So SCTV, and I mentioned this, I'm from the state of South Carolina in the United States of America. And growing up, my dad would always talk about SCTV. And in South Carolina, there is SCETV, which is like the public broadcasting system. And I was confused by why there was so much comedy on SCTV for so long. I figured it out eventually, but...
Yeah.
But
that's awesome.
That show, went back and watched so much more of that we didn't talk about on air because that cast was so phenomenal.
Oh man, it really, really was. And just like the way you guys will dive into, you'll do like monster movies for a month, and you'll do anime for a little while, and then talk about video games. When you and Miles started talking about I think it was actually Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link. It's probably a year ago now.
Oh yeah, it's been a while.
It got me to start that game back up on my Switch and play Zelda 2. I'm like, no, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna finally beat it, and I did. It took forever. It took forever, and I used all sorts of guides to do it. I am not afraid to say that, but I beat that damn game. It took me until I was 40.
I played a little bit more of that game, but when I played it, I used because the Switch Online has like special hacked versions of the game, and there's a version of Zelda 2 that has like max health and max magic.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And I definitely played with that.
I 100% just wore out the rewind feature in that game. Like, rewind that a little bit, and there we go again. Like, I had to.
Definitely such a bonus of playing on something new, because, man, that game is complicated feelings from my favorite video game franchise.
Yes, right, same.
Final Fantasy in there, too.
But yeah, The More You Nerd, definitely check that out. Miles is going to be back. We're actually working on getting him back here soon. So, but yep, The More You Nerd with Drew and Miles, you guys are great, and I love that show. Definitely check it out. If you like this and you like nerdy stuff at all, you'll love The More You Nerd. So,
and I want to thank you for having me on for 200. I feel super honored to be here for it, man.
Absolutely. Well, and I'm not sugarcoating at all. You're one of my favorite guests to have on, because we always have such a good conversation, and you are great at bringing things that I didn't think of while I'm watching it, but then make perfect sense once we start talking. So it's always a good conversation. So definitely, and plus picking Zardoz, I was like, oh, that's perfect. That's such a bonkers movie to do for number 200. So 200 episodes of this show. I can't believe I got to that point. I wouldn't have thought starting off almost 4 years ago that I would have made it 4 years, let alone done 200 episodes in that time. But I did. So, and I want to thank everybody who has joined me on this ride and been listening. And here's to another, as many as I can do. I'm just going to keep doing them until I lose interest. But
until you become apathetic.
Yes.
No, never.
never will. Now, I did mention tvstravis.com. It has been newly redesigned, so go check that out. That's very, very fun. It's a whole new thing. It looks a lot better. You can see this show, other shows that I work on. There's a way to find merchandise, which I am going to start working on a design for I've Seen Zardoz, so you don't have to. That's going to be a shirt. And you can also go to patreon.com.
Just the zoomed in Mankini. It's just,
yes.
I've Seen Zardoz Mankini, so you don't have to. That's
perfect. Love it.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, that's great. You can also support the show by just listening, telling people about it who maybe haven't seen it or heard it before. Or you can go to patreon.com/WYHS, and for as little as $1 an episode, support financially if you want to. And shows come out. I record live Sunday nights at twitch.tv/tvstravis, so you can watch there. There's usually a video on demand for a couple of weeks after that. I also put stuff up on my YouTube page. I'm TV's Travis everywhere, so you can find me anywhere. If you want to talk about episodes, you want to give me any feedback, tvstravis@gmail.com, or Twitter @tvstravis works too. And I love hearing from everybody, and I just want to say thank you to everybody for joining me for 200 episodes, and here's to another 200 plus. Let's just keep doing it, because it's so much fun. But thank you, Drew, for being here for number 200 and finally getting me to watch this damn movie.
Thank you. I loved it. Well, I didn't love it, but I loved this.
There you go. See, and that's what makes it worth it. Like, sitting through a movie like that is a chore, but then getting to have a good conversation with a good friend afterwards, totally worth it. So thank you.
Absolutely.
And next week, I've got a really off-the-wall movie. Oh, shoot. Hang on. It is No Escape. No, that's coming up in a couple of weeks. Next week, I'm watching Creature from the Black Lagoon.
Ooh, a classic.
Yeah, we're going back, 1954. And my guest will be the host of a podcast that I was on a few months back called Haven't Seen It. No, that's a different show. This one was it was reflecting on old cartoons, and I watched the Karate Kid cartoon from the 80s. Did you know that existed? Because it existed.
So what Miles and I have done in the last year is we did a whole we call them set-aptations, where we covered the Karate Kid cartoon, we covered the RoboCop cartoon, we covered oh gosh, I can't remember some of the other ones that we did,
I forgot about the RoboCop cartoon.
We did a whole bunch of cartoon adaptations of TV shows.
And it's KG from the Pop-Up Filmcast, aka That Was Great, wasn't it? And we talked about the Karate Kid, which was wild. I can't believe that was. I've seen some cartoon adaptations, but that definitely fits sadaptation.
It if you would imagine Daniel-san and Mr. Miyagi traveling the planet with another random girl that they never explain, chasing a floating
idol
amulet.
Yeah. It's just weird. But yeah, that's what we're gonna KG's gonna come on. We're gonna talk about Creature from the Black Lagoon. Nice. I got a couple other fun ones down the pipeline. That's gonna be great. I found somebody who's never seen Titanic before. We're gonna watch Titanic.
I've never seen Titanic.
I'll give you a pass on that. As well as the Ray Liotta classic No Escape is also coming up soon.
That when we covered the Karate Kid cartoon, you were on our show for that because we also covered Highlander, the animated series.
That's right. Audie and I came on for Highlander because that was a thing. That is crazy. So yeah, that's coming up in the next couple of weeks. Creature from the Black Lagoon next week. So come on back for that. Drew, thank you so much for being here. This has been
thank you for having me, man. I really appreciate this. I love doing this.
Absolutely. We'll have you back again sometime soon. And until then, remember to enjoy your movies. And this has been Wait You Haven't Seen. Hey, let's be excellent to each other.
Zardoz has spoken.
He has spoken.